Om Jnanati Mirandhati Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Svaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Vanchakam Terubhyascha Kipasindubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaha. So we're continuing our topic on prayer. Anything that you can remember from yesterday?
We can read the prayers of Acharyas and inspire from them, and we can create our own words. And even if we are not in that level, we can pray to be in that level. And if we repeat these prayers, we can also become in that level.
Very nice. Something else?
We should know the content of the prayers. Content of the prayers.
Context.
Context.
Yes, we should know the context of the prayers. Who spoke them in what circumstance? Anything else? We were talking about certain elements or qualities that can help us deepen our prayer. Specifically, I mentioned 4. Can anyone recall some?
Faith, knowledge, selflessness, purification of heart.
Yes. So faith in the Lord, then our prayer will be deeper. The more faith we have, the more we'll be able to surrender. And knowledge, of course, we have the knowledge of the activity, how to pray. And the more we know about the Lord, the more we can glorify Him. As the heart becomes purified, then our desires are more in line with the Lord. Now I would like to continue this topic of praying with our own words, but addressing a sense of inaptitude, the feeling that I can't express myself so nicely as the Acharyas or the Srimad Bhagavatam can, or devotees in the Srimad Bhagavatam can. So when we pray with our own words, it means that we either spontaneously address the Lord, or it can mean that we carefully construct a prayer and even write it down. So usually when we come into the temple and pay our respects to the Lord in the morning and offer some words of prayer, we glorify the Lord or we express our gratitude, joy upon seeing them, maybe share something we're planning to do in the day. We just spontaneously use our words. But sometimes it is our happiness and our duty to deeply meditate and compose words of glorification and appreciation. And an example is when we write a Vyasa Puja offering. Srila Prabhupada introduced this to us, that on the appearance day of the spiritual master, on the appearance day of Srila Prabhupada, we write an offering. Who has ever written an offering to Srila Prabhupada and the spiritual master? So this is a really wonderful practice, because of course we glorify the spiritual master every day, glorify Srila Prabhupada every day. But once a year, we give real quality time to meditating on that gratitude and what we can thank the spiritual master. We beg for forgiveness for offenses. We glorify the spiritual master. And this is very important for our spiritual advancement. I want to share with you 2 instances when my spiritual master emphasized this to me. One was in 1995. We lived in New Vrajadam at the time. But there was the Budapest Woodstock festival going on, and many spiritual masters came to visit. And Guru Maharaj called me to come and translate. And it was just at the time of Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day. Somehow, I don't know if it was after or I don't remember the timing, but the point is that I wrote an offering to Prabhupada, but I left it on the farm. It was so sudden that I had to come and I didn't bring it. So we were sitting in the Budapest temple like this. It was just not a picture of Prabhupada, but we had a deity and there were many devotees. Guru Maharaj was calling the devotees one by one to read their offering to Prabhupada. So at one point said, Manjari. So I said, I don't have my offering. And then he went to someone else. And then he asked someone else, and someone else, someone else. And then he came back to me, he said, Manjari. So I was like, I don't have my offering here. So other devotees were glorifying Srila Prabhupada, reading their offering. Next day we were on the island where the Woodstock Festival was taking place. It's a huge big park. Guru Maharaj pulled me aside and I got one of the worst chastisements ever for not having read my offering to Prabhupada. So he said, what are you doing here? What is your relationship with Srila Prabhupada? Can't you just stand up and say thank you? So he was expressing that. It went on for a while, like he was really emphasizing the point, but one thing that is very, very important to engage in this activity every year, and also that it doesn't have to be something very elaborate. It's just with your own words, you just have to, from your heart, express your gratitude to Srila Prabhupada. Often when we write our offering, we are really giving it quality time and thought and nicely trying to compose the words, which is very nice, but if we don't have those composed words, we can always just say something from the heart. And then the next one was this year, 2022, in New Rajadam, on Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day. So when Govinda Maharaj is there, it's always kirtan, kirtan, kirtan. So we have not so much time for other elements of ceremonies. And there was a schedule, and the plan was that we would have kirtan, and then Prabhupada disciples give class, and then Prabhupada disciples read their offerings, and then we do the Bhoga offerings for Srila Prabhupada, then Guru Puja and Pushpanjali, feast. So Prabhupada disciples read their offerings. Part of the plan was that Radha Krishna Prabhu as the GBC and Prithvipati Prabhu as the Yatra leader, they will read. When that was over, then Guru Maharaj said, okay, so who else will read? So no one was planned to read or prepared to read. Temple room was packed with devotees. Everyone is silent. So then Guru Maharaj said, again, like, what is your relationship with Srila Prabhupada? How come no one wants to glorify Srila Prabhupada? It is our pleasure and our duty to glorify Srila Prabhupada. Anytime, anywhere. We should all be jumping up to say, I want to glorify Srila Prabhupada. So he said, at least senior devotees, leaders have to show this example to younger devotees. So then we were like slowly putting our hands in. And then he said, okay, you. So then we were reading offerings. So I just want to emphasize the importance of this form of prayer. And also that please take the time and effort every year to write an offering to your spiritual master, to Srila Prabhupada. These prayers, either when we spontaneously address the Lord or when we have nicely meditated, constructed prayer, or prayers according to the level of our own realization. You may remember that Krishna emphasized prayers with our own words to Uddhava. But often when we want to do so, we are faced with the limits of our abilities. So I would like to show you a few verses or quotes that even very elevated Vaishnavas feel that they are unqualified to offer words of praise to the Lord. Now this may both discourage us or encourage us. If they say they can't do it, then how could I? But the real example here is that despite the sense of ineptitude, they do pray to the Lord. Srila Prahlad Maharaj's prayers are so wonderful that they have been famous for thousands of years. But this is actually how he felt about praying. He says, how is it possible for me, who have been born in a family of asuras, to offer suitable prayers to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Something we can identify with. Even until now, all the demigods headed by Lord Brahma and all the saintly persons could not satisfy the Lord by streams of excellent words, although such persons are very qualified, being in the mode of goodness. Then what is said to be said of me? I'm not at all qualified. And Srila Prabhupada's purport to this verse reveals a little more. He says, a Vaishnava who is fully qualified to serve the Lord still thinks himself extremely low while offering prayers to the Lord. Thus he considers himself unqualified, lower than the worms in stool, and more sinful than Jagai and Madai. A pure Vaishnava actually thinks of himself in this way. Similarly, although Prahlad Maharaj was a pure, exalted Vaishnava, he thought himself most unqualified to offer prayers to the Supreme Lord. So here Srila Prabhupada is referring to the very humble words of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who says, Jagai Madai Haite Mui Sapapishta Purishera Kita Haite Mui Saragishta. He says that I'm more fallen than Jagai and Madai, more sinful than Jagai and Madai, and I am lower than the worm in stool. Now this is the heartfelt, these are the heartfelt words of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who wrote Chaitanya Charitamrita, and who is an eternal associate of the Lord. So Prabhupada refers to him how, no matter how advanced someone is or how qualified someone is, one will always feel unqualified. It's actually those who are unqualified who feel qualified. So the feeling of incompetence is very natural when a tiny living entity is addressing the mighty Supreme Lord. And it's actually a prerequisite of humble prayer. However, no matter how inadequate we may feel, we can address the Lord saying, Dear Krishna, I don't know how to pray, please help me. And we already begun to pray. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And Krishna reciprocates with the desire to address him and helps the devotees to express himself. After all, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that I am the ability, I am man, aham purusham nishu. So this is a section from the Bhagavatam purport from the first canto spoken by Srila Prabhupada. He says, by glorifying the Lord with exalted verses, one becomes purified. Although we are unable to offer prayers to the Lord in an adequate fashion, our duty is to make the attempt in order to purify ourselves. So as I was saying, it is our pleasure to glorify the Lord, but here Prabhupada said it is also our duty to make an attempt to purify yourself. It is the duty to pray in order to purify ourselves. Then he continues, it is not that we should stop our glorification because demigods like Lord Brahma or Lord Shiva cannot adequately glorify the Lord. So we shouldn't think, oh, these great devotees are thinking they can't do it, then I won't even try. Rather, as stated by Prahlad Maharaj, everyone should glorify the Lord according to his own ability. So, according to our ability, we don't have to compare. I'm not going to write a Vyasa Puja offering because so many devotees write so many wonderful words, and who am I to say something nice? No, Prabhupada says it is our duty to do it. Everyone should glorify the Lord according to his own ability. And then he says, if we are serious and sincere devotees, the Lord will give us the intelligence to offer prayers properly. So we just have to trust the Lord. If we are serious and sincere, he will help us. There are several places in the Bhagavatam where we read that the ability to pray is the gift of the Lord. This is confirmed by the Lord himself. An example is when he speaks to Brahma after hearing his prayers. So this is when Brahma prayed for creative energy, and Lord Vishnu is responding. He says, O Brahma, the prayers that you have chanted praising the glories of my transcendental activities, the penances you have undertaken to understand me, and your firm faith in me, all these are to be considered my causeless mercy. So this is our mentality when we are successful in doing something, that it happened by Krishna's mercy. Srila Shivram Swami Maharaj, Guru Maharaj is so wonderfully explaining how Krishna is everything in the seminar he's giving. So what's my credit? Krishna is the ability, he's the result of the activity, he's everything. So we just have the desire to serve and to please, and then Krishna arranges things. So we don't take credit. We know if we can speak nice words, then they are Krishna's causeless mercy. I've already mentioned the story of Dhruva Maharaj earlier, and when Dhruva performed his austerities and finally Lord Vishnu appeared to him and he offered his prayer, it was also by the mercy of Lord Vishnu. When he saw the Lord in front of him, he wanted to say the appropriate words, but being inexperienced, he suddenly didn't know what to say. I mean, imagine if Krishna would just appear in front of you. What would you say? It's something to contemplate. What would I say? Often when we're going somewhere and we're going to meet someone, we're kind of planning already in our head what we will say, how we will greet them. So hopefully one day, by the mercy of our spiritual masters, we will be able to be in Krishna's association. It's good to contemplate, what will I say? So Lord Krishna is there in everyone's hearts, and he understood Dhruva's situation, that he's trying to say words but he doesn't know what to say. So we read in the Bhagavatam that out of his causeless mercy he touched Dhruva Maharaj's head with his conch. And just by the touch of the Lord's conch, Dhruva understood perfectly the conclusion of the Vedas, the absolute truth, the relationship between the absolute truth and the living entities. So remember, here we are talking about a little Kshatriya boy whose only desire is to have an empire greater than even Lord Brahma. And then suddenly, by the touch of the conch, all this understanding is there. And then he was able to chant his prayers. So it is by Krishna's mercy that we can find the right words to glorify him, or express our desires to serve him or take shelter of him. And since prayer is an expression of our relationship with him, it makes him happy. We may not be able to find the most beautiful words like great poets. Still, he's pleased our attempt at prayer. Just as parents are so happy when children start to talk and they can't really pronounce the words properly, but parents are so happy. Because when we pray, we want to express our hearts to the Lord. And actually, we do not reach Krishna with our words as much as we do with our heart. Krishna encourages the speech of his children because he uses prayer to shape us. So actually, it is not he who needs prayers, but we need to pray to have a relationship with him. However, it is natural that children grow up. And Krishna also expects us to grow up in prayer. So we just read that the Lord will give the sincere and serious devotees the intelligence to offer their prayers properly. So he expects us to be serious and sincere. If we read carefully about the state of mind a devotee has when he offers prayers, we can learn what qualities are required to pray well. This is a verse by Narada Muni, who talks about Prahlad Maharaj, how he was praying. He said, Prahlad Maharaj fixed his mind and sight upon Lord Nrsimhadev with full attention in complete trance. With a fixed mind, he began to offer prayers in love with a faltering voice. So the right attitude for prayer is full attention to the Lord, a fixed mind, and love. So Saturday, Nrsimha Krishna Prabhu was so nicely speaking about the 10 offenses, mentioning how inattentiveness is a problem in the relationship between us and the holy name. How inattention is an offense. In Sanskrit, the word is aparatha. It means something that distances us from Krishna. So here Narada Muni says, Prahlad Maharaj prayed with attention. Attention is a prerequisite of any deep relationship. We're very attentive to what the other person is saying. We're very sensitive. Attention also means a kind of sensitivity to the needs of the other person. And then fixed mind. Last night, Guru Maharaj spoke about steadiness. So for deep prayer, that steady mind, that fixed concentration is also important. Have you ever had the experience that you come to Mangala Arati and you start to sing Samsara Davana Lalita Loka, and then next you realize Yasya Prasada, Bhagavat Prasada, and you don't know what happened in between? So we focus on the first verse and then the mind wanders, and then already the person leading the kirtan is singing the 8th verse. So just as with chanting, when I see my mind wanders, when I chant the Maha Mantra, I bring it back. So the same way, during any prayer, it's very important. Oops, I see my mind went somewhere else. Fixed mind. Without the fixed mind, I'm saying the words, but my heart is not there, my focus is not there. So we should constantly endeavor for these, for being attentive, for fixing our mind, and to offer prayers out of love. Krishna wants us to become more and more mature spiritually. Of course, this maturity has nothing to do with age. This is a purport of Srila Prabhupada from the 3rd canto. Of course, again about prayer. He says, a profusion of such selected words comes from a devotee who is fully absorbed in affection and love for the devotional service of the Lord. There are many instances in which even a small boy who was a great devotee of the Lord could offer excellent prayers in the choicest words for glorification of the pastimes of the Lord. So here we also read, fully absorbed. Bhaktivinoda Thakur also emphasizes the importance of praying with attention and love. He says, Nama kara bahirhaya, nama nahihaya. But it says, Nama kara, if you chant the name, but it's bahirkaya, it's only external, you just say the words. It says, Nama nahihaya, that's not the name. It shouldn't just be an external activity of saying words, it should be with the heart. When he says, if you just chant with the words, it's just external and it's not the name, then he actually says that it's not a prayer. So, we should always endeavor to grow in these qualities that we've been mentioning so far. Among the Chatushloki, the 4 main verses of the Bhagavatam, there's one that says, Itavadeva jijñāsam. You have to advance or inquire up to this point. We move ahead constantly up to this point. The point is spiritual perfection. So we looked at examples of how even very advanced devotees feel unqualified. But these humble words, like of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami we've been mentioning, it's not a state of lethargy, but a stage of awareness of something bigger than ourselves. So thus these advanced devotees, in these examples we see how they depend on the Lord and have a desire, express a desire for qualification, and they act to get it. So we should strive for spiritual advancement, and this is expressed by Srila Prabhupada in another purport. He says, one cannot offer prayers to the Lord with mundane words. One must become spiritually advanced by controlling the mind and senses. Then he can find suitable words to offer prayers to the Lord. So it's not like you should try. He says one must become spiritually advanced by controlling the mind and senses. So I'm going to stop now for questions, because then I'm going to go into another topic, which is the language of prayer. So if you have any questions on what we spoke until now, then you can ask.
Actually, I have 2 questions. Maybe the second one you will talk later, so we can skip. The first question is about Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. I don't know how many months before I read his words about feeling like a worm in a stew. It surprised me so much. Feeling like that should not be a very difficult to act, or without like self-esteem. Maybe I cannot put the words very well, because I couldn't understand what kind of feeling is that. Because I understand that if we compare ourselves with the Lord, it's obvious we are very insignificant. But feeling like that all the time, how it can affect us?
In Brihad Bhagavatamrita, there is a wonderful description about how prema and humility are inseparable. And as Guru Maharaj has been expressing in the past few days, that there are certain things that can't be really spoken about. So this is also like that. We cannot conceive that level of humility these devotees who have the love of God feel. So it's hard to really understand what they feel. There's this saying, Vaishnavira Kriya Mudra Vigyena Bhujaya. It's impossible to understand the devotees' activities, the way devotees are, because it's so deep. So we may not be able to fully understand, but it's definitely helping us to become humble. Because if so exalted and qualified people feel so unqualified, and if we compare ourselves to them, then where are we? In the evening seminar, we're going through the 20 qualities that are needed to attain knowledge. And the first two in the list are amanitvam, adambitvam, humility and pridelessness. So we can be inspired by seeing these examples, but we can't really understand how you can be in such a state of mind and not be depressed. Because often when we feel low and unqualified, it's a sense of, we get lethargic and depressed. But when one has that kind of humility and one is on a very elevated level of spiritual advancement, it's actually a state of spiritual ecstasy. So there's a big difference.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the nice points. I've been living something for quite a long time, and it happens in my lows, like there's someone seriously in that family, or I'm feeling very lots of deep feelings for the Lord.
Lots of?
Deep feelings
Deep
for the
feelings.
Lord. It's the two extremes. The words spring up from inside me, but I don't plan it. I don't plan it. And if there are people around, I'm internally speaking. And if there's nobody around, I'm externally speaking, sometimes screaming, if I have very strong feelings. But when I request something in those instances, it's like karma clearance, or karma, please finalize this karma, or something like that. Are these prayers as well? They happen so spontaneously without planning. I don't know what they are.
Yeah, so we define prayer as addressing the Lord. So whenever we connect to the Lord, we connect to thoughts, whatever is happening around us, and we address Him, then of course there's also blasphemy. But if it's, I'm just saying that any address is a glorification, it can also be a blasphemy, unfortunately. But if it's about our relationship as servants of Krishna, then it's a prayer.
Sometimes I scream when my feelings are very intense, but I don't mean anything bad. It's just the intensity. I can't control it.
Yeah, so we learn how to express ourselves more and more in line of what pleases the Lord by reading how Shastra shows us how devotees pray, or acharyas show us how devotees pray, and then even if we have intense emotions, we know how to give it a nice form that will please Krishna the most. Culture is actually form to emotions. So we learn what is the best form. We learn this, what's the form in the spiritual realm, how devotees express themselves. We learn this culture here in this world because that improves our relationship with Krishna, the relationship with each other. So sometimes it's said, you may feel emotions, but you need to express those emotions so the other person understands in the relationship. So we need to learn what's the proper way to express those emotions. Any other question connected to? So we go on to the next topic, which is, does the language of prayer matter? Vedic creation theory describes the process of creation of the world in great detail and identifies sounds as its origin. Sound also plays a cardinal role in the maintenance of the material world. as well as in the liberation of those in the bondage of illusion. The line of Vedanta Sutra, Om Anavritti Shabdat, means that one can attain liberation through transcendental sound. Krishna, after the creation of the material world, imparts Vedic knowledge in the form of transcendental sound, Shabda Brahma, to the first being, Lord Brahma. And in doing so, he says, Shabda Brahma Mama Shashvatistanu. I am the form of the transcendental vibrations, and this transcendental sound is my eternal form. The language of this transcendental revelation is Sanskrit, and it takes form mainly in mantras. Sanskrit is a very extraordinary language. This is something Srila Prabhupada says about the Sanskrit language in a letter. Actually, he wrote this in a letter to Madhusudan in 1968. Of course, this topic comes up because we are memorizing so many prayers in Sanskrit language. So I'd like to show you why we don't just learn these verses in the translations in our own words. So Prabhupada wrote, Sanskrit is spoken not only on Krishna Loka, but also in higher planets of the demigods. It is called the language of God and the demigods. It was spoken also on this planet when people were all godly. They used to speak in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the origin of all languages of the civilized peoples. It is most perfect, not only descriptive. The word Sanskrit means the most perfect. Language plays a determining role in the life of a society, as words express consciousness and values. So here Prabhupada says Sanskrit is spoken not only on Krishna Loka, but also on the higher planets. But this means that in the spiritual world, Sanskrit is a spoken language. So how does it connect to consciousness and values? In the transcendental world, God is the center of all thoughts, words, actions, and emotions. And for the inhabitants of the spiritual world, God's pleasure is the highest value. Since the Sanskrit language directly descended from this realm, the language of the eternal inhabitants of the spiritual world is the most suitable for conveying concepts related to the absolute truth. Sanskrit words express meanings that cannot be accurately expressed in other languages. We don't have that consciousness and we don't have those values in other cultures, so we don't have words for them. Sanskrit words can express all levels of physical, emotional, intellectual and spiritual ideas. The vocabulary of the Sanskrit language is unparalleled, and words have several meanings. It is therefore impossible to translate them completely accurately into other languages. Some of the meanings remain hidden. I'm sure you have the experience of reading Prabhupada's books, and when we read the purport, within the purport, which is in English, there are so many Sanskrit words, like yoga, karma, prasad, mantra, Bhagavan, sannyas, etc. So many words we don't translate because they mean so much. Translating the text into another language is always a challenge, but it's especially so when you go from the language of one culture to the language of another culture. So Vaishnavas treasure the original verses of their scriptures and read and repeat prayers in the original language. It's not expected that every Vaishnava becomes a learned Sanskrit scholar, but words used in everyday communication are important to learn. Bhoga, puja, mangala arti, so many words we use. If someone just comes from the outside, they don't know what these mean, but gradually we become used to it. And also concepts necessary to understand the science of devotion we need to know. Kirtan, japa, bhava, prema, anartha, bhakti, rasa, so many words. And the prayers that are regularly repeated should also be learned by everyone. Srila Prabhupada gave us his books with the original Devanagari text, Roman transliteration, word-for-word translation, and then the translation. Generally when there is a novel translated to another language, and it's just the original is in one language and then the translation is in another language. So Prabhupada could have just given us the English verses, purports. But he emphasized the importance of the Sanskrit language and seeing the original verses and analyzing those verses with knowing the word-for-word translations. This is something he said in a class in Tokyo in 1972. So we should try to learn, get it by heart, at least one shloka, 2 shloka in a week. When I joined, there was one devotee who was preaching to me. She told me this, a shloka a day keeps Maya away. I had a little notebook. I would go to the temple every day after my classes. She would give me a new verse to memorize by the next day. Original Sanskrit verses. So here Prabhupada is very kind. He says, 1 or 2 a week is enough. Who is memorizing 1 or 2 shlokas a week? Okay, so those who don't, then you can see, Prabhupada says, we should try to learn, get it by heart, at least. You can do it 1 verse every day, but at least 1 or 2 a week. And then he continues, and if we chant that, just like you're chanting so many songs, similarly, if we chant 1 or 2 verses of Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, that will make you very quickly advanced in spiritual realization. Who would like quick advancement in spiritual life? Here's the key. If we chant 1 or 2 verses of Bhagavatam, meaning to memorize, as he said before, that will make you very quickly advanced in spiritual realization. Then he says, we're therefore taking so much trouble to get this transliteration, the meaning, so that the reader may take advanced step, full advantage of the mantra. So although initially Prabhupada's disciples had no knowledge of Sanskrit, but Prabhupada from day one quoted the original Sanskrit verses. Because he knew that the original sound vibration of Shastra is so purifying. So in another lecture in Los Angeles he said, so read Bhagavatam, pronounce the verses nicely, therefore we're repeating. You hear the records and try to repeat. Simply by chanting the mantra, you'll be purified. Simply by chant. Even if you do not understand a single word of it, simply if you chant, this vibration has got such power. So, like this, Prabhupada is very much encouraging his disciples, his followers, to memorize the Sanskrit verses, to repeat them, because it's very purifying. As we said, like Srimad Bhagavatam is not different from Krishna. So when we repeat these original verses, then we are directly connected with Krishna. Also, we were speaking about attention, how important attention is for developing a relationship or having a deep relationship. When you chant Hare Krishna, your mind can wander. But when you memorize something, you have to be very focused. So if you've tried, it's a deep relationship with Krishna when you try to memorize a verse, because you're so focused on Him. And that way it helps the relationship. So now time is up and I will stop here. We were speaking about how unqualified, even elevated devotees feel. But that sense of inaptitude, feeling unqualified, should not stop us from praying. And I started to introduce this topic that praying in the original language is important, and this is what we will continue tomorrow. So I'm not going to ask for questions on this now because I haven't finished this topic. This will go into tomorrow. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Some devotees had to leave, and I've already mentioned those who are watching online. If you have any questions, please send them to Krishnamala, and then we can also address those. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Shyama Sundar ki Jai, Shri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani, Sadguruj Mahaprabhu Shri Shri Gauritai Giriraj Maharaj, Shri Guru Parampara ki Jai, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanand.
Her Grace Manjari Mataji ki
Jai, Govinda ki Jai.